Young Jedi Knights, Lightsabers, Chapter 18. By now, Zeke considered his lightsaber an old friend. Though he had not taken the time or care to build his own weapon, he practically lived with the Scarlet Beam. He knew how to make it dance against imaginary enemies. He had fought and defeated every simulated monster the computers could portray in the training room. He had slain Minox, Abyssins, Crate Dragons, Wampa Ice Monsters, Piranha Beetles, and hordes of angry Tusken Raiders. In the one battle, he had even felled a ferocious rancor with his lightsaber. After that very difficult victory, Zeke wished he could have watched the reaction of his rival Villas, who seemed so enamored with the hideous beasts. Now Zeke strode beside Brachus, as the master of the Shadow Academy led him down corridors towards the station's central hub. Busy with his training, Zeke had never thought to venture here before. No longer an overconfident and underwhelmed trainee, Zeke had walked in his full leather armor with ease, lightsaber at his side, as if he were almost Brachus' equal. The Shadow Academy's master seemed pleased with him and withdrawn, though. The perfectly chiseled features of his handsome face were set in an unreadable mask, his forehead showing just a trace of a frown. Zeke cleared his throat, finally curious enough to speak. Master Brachus, I sense uneasiness in you. You haven't told me about the next exercise. Is there something I should know? Brachus paused and fixed the young man with a calm, piercing gaze. You are about to face your most difficult trial, Zeke. Everything depends on this. You must demonstrate how talented you truly are. Zeke lifted his chin and drew a deep breath, flaring his nostrils. His hand moved instinctively to his lightsaber. I'm ready for anything. They reached the thick metal door, and Brachus punched in a code that opened pneumatic locks. The heavy hatch opened slowly, revealing a small airlock chamber and a second sealed metal door blocking the other side. Brachus said, Trust in your abilities, Zeke. Feel the force. Zeke nodded solemnly. As always, Master Brachus, I will pass your test. Why is it so important? Why should you be so concerned? Brachus gestured the young man inside the chamber. Zeke entered and stood waiting. Brachus remained outside. Because it will be a fight to the death, he said, and then slammed the door, blocking Zeke inside. Within the echoing airlock chamber, Zeke waited. Master Brachus' words reverberated in his mind. The doors remained sealed, and he had forced himself to breathe calmly, though he felt claustrophobic and trapped. Drawing his trusted lightsaber, he gripped it until his knuckles turned white, but he did not yet turn on the blade. Seconds pounded by, and still the other door didn't open. Fear swelled within him, but he pushed it aside. A Jedi had no place for fear, no reason to fear. The Force was in all things, and the dark side was his ally. Still, though Zeke had defeated ferocious creatures in the simulation chamber whose opponents had been mere phantoms, he knew that many more dangerous things happened in a real battle with a real opponent. He looked at the inner door, wondering if he could hack it open with his lightsaber and force his way free. He needed to see what lurked on the other side. Was this perhaps part of the test? How long should he wait? Patience, he told himself. He began to count to 100. But before he reached 10, the automatic locks on the inner door gave a thump that vibrated through the metal wall. The door swung open by itself. Zeke felt a disorienting lurch as he stepped out into well-lit nothingness. The floors and ceilings and walls spun about in a blur until he realized that he had tumbled into a chamber where the artificial gravity had been turned off. The zero-gravity arena at the hub of the Shadow Academy. He floated free in the open air of the spherical chamber, with no sense of up or down, with nothing to stop his motion. Zeke's stomach gave a lurch, but he drew a deep breath and concentrated on not throwing up. He focused on the images around him, trying to snatch answers from the briefest glimpses. Grasping the hilt of his lightsaber, he slowed his weightless tumbling and balanced himself. Only then did he notice the seats and standing areas that studded the walls of the chamber, the dozens of noisy onlookers, the balconies pasted at haphazard angles to accommodate spectators in zero gravity. Stormtroopers stood in the ranks, gripping the balcony rails. The other students of the Shadow Academy all sat around, ready to watch the spectacle. He stiffened, wondering just how difficult the test was going to be. What had Brachus meant? What was Zeke supposed to do now? Boulders like miniature asteroids floated in the center of the open arena, along with metal boxes, small cargo containers, and artificial geometric constructions. Long durasteel pipes drifted free. Zeke could make no sense of the random mix of small and large objects. Suddenly he understood. They were obstacles. On the curved wall at the far side of the arena, Zeke saw the clear blister of an observation dome. With his sharp eyesight, he spotted figures inside. Figures he recognized. The silver-robed figure of Brachus, the intimidating Night Sister Timothy Kai, with her voluptuous ebony hair and her black spinned cape, and the black-armored figure of Coral, the TIE pilot. Master Brachus leaned forward and spoke to the voice amplifier. His words boomed through the amphitheater, and all background noise had faded. You are now all here to witness the selection of our leader for our new Dark Jedi trainees, a leader who shall be the first generation general of our Shadow Academy forces when the Second Imperium makes its grand foray to reclaim the galaxy. Here before you, we will witness the great battle. On the other side of the chamber, where the view was particularly blocked by drifting obstacles, another airlock opened, and a dark figure emerged. Because of the floating debris, Zeke couldn't see who it was. Brachus continued. This will be a duel to the death between Zeke. He paused, but none of the students cheered. They knew better, for they would have to follow whomever the victor of this contest might be, and Phyllis! Zeke turned, keeping his lightsaber handle in front of him, as he faced the thick-browed young man from Dathomir, Timothy Kai's most powerful trainee. Zavilas had his ignited lightsaber ready for the duel. Zavilas pushed off from the far wall and flew toward the obstacles at the center. Zeke switched on his weapon and did the same, moving to meet his opponent in the open space. Zeke's heart pounded, and he realized that despite his anxiety, this was a battle he had longed for. How many times since he'd come to the Shadow Academy had Vilas been his rival? After today, there'd be no question who the greater student was. Vilas shouted in his mocking, oily voice, If you surrender now, young trash collector, I may only cripple you. He laughed. Zeke felt himself flush. Norris, or one of the other lost ones, must have told Vilas their derogatory name for him, trash collector. Zeke reached the floating debris and found it pitted oblong stone, an iron-hard meteorite. He grasped it. If you think victory is going to be that easy, Vilas, I'll defeat you before you can blink. He hurled the stone with all his strength. In zero gravity, the meteorite shot toward the other Dark Jedi, but the equal and opposite reaction after he threw the stone surprised Zeke, and he found himself tumbling backward from the momentum. He slammed headfirst into one of the floating metal cargo containers. A flash of bright pain burst inside his skull. His ears rang. He cleared his vision just in time to see Vilas easily nudge himself out of the way of the flying rock. Vilas laughed. Is that the best you can do, trash collector? Zeke realized he had been foolish. He concentrated, using the abilities he had recently acquired. Since Vilas was no longer looking at the stone, Zeke used the force to yank it back toward his enemy. The rock didn't have enough distance to build up much speed, but it struck a sharp blow to Vilas' shoulder. The other young man cried out, rebounding from the impact. Zeke found himself floating out of control, unable to move where he wanted. He couldn't swim through the air, and he felt entirely disoriented. The walls spun around him. Finally, his feet pressed against the side of a drifting cargo container, and he propelled himself toward Vilas again. His lightsaber drew a fiery streak through the air as he plunged forward. Vilas was ready for him, though. His glowing energy blade held up as he spun toward. The two opponents approached like colliding cannonballs. Zeke swung, and Vilas met his lightsaber with his own. The blades clashed and sparkled. Boats of electricity splashed off in random directions. Then Zeke shot past while Vilas scrambled in the empty air trying to pursue. Zeke tried to locate one of the floated obstacles or something to bounce off, but suddenly Jedi instinct warned him to twist out of the way. In an instant, Vilas came flying by, his lightsaber slashing and humming through the air. Zeke contorted, leaping backward over a low fence, but not quite fast enough. His enemy's fiery weapon skimmed too close. nicking Zeke's prized leather armor and leaving a smoking gash. When Villas turned with hoots of victory, Zeke felt anger boil up from the depths of his mind, allowing him to draw more strongly on the dark side of the Force. Reaching out into the floating debris, he grabbed a pyramidal greenhouse module and smashed the massive object into Villas with enough force to shatter its transparasteel planes. As Villas reeled, he chopped with his lightsaber to cleave the greenhouse module in half. The two smoldering portions tumbled in opposite directions. His face contorted with rage, Villas kicked off with one of the floating specimens and hurled towards Zeke, who waited with his lightsaber held low. Villas made ready to swipe his blade across the space where Zeke was. Zeke knew that if their blades clashed again, the momentum would send them both tumbling out of control. Just as Villas drew back his lightsaber for a mighty blow, Villas used the force to give himself a sharp shove away. Villas swept out with full force, and the energy blade buzzed through empty air. Because nothing had stopped the stroke of his sword, Villas spun about like a snow tornado, tumbling and disoriented. Zeke saw his opportunity to buy time. He shot up behind one of the larger meteoroids hanging in the center of the weightless arena and plastered himself against the rock surface, pressing his back against the rough stone. He could hide there for a moment and then come back fighting. Inside the arena's observation blister, Quirrell remained standing, while Brackus and Timothy Kai both sat in padded chairs, watching their respective champions and hoping for a personal victory. Quirrell tried to hide his uneasiness, but could not divert his attention from the two talented young opponents fighting viciously out in the zero-gravity chamber. Timothy Kai's eyes blazed with violet fire as she fixed upon the battle. She spoke out of the corner of her dark mouth, mocking Brackus. "Your boy has no chance," she said. "Villas is much more ruthless. I have trained him. Vonda Ra has trained him. Even Garwin has trained him. That young man is the accumulation of our efforts on Dathomir. Why bother with this wasteful contest? Just give Villas command of the new Dark Jedi." Brackus sat, exuding outward calm, though Quirrell could tell from the subtle, reflexive expressions on his face each time the battle reached a new peak that his duel had filled the Shadow Academy master with tension. "Ah, Timothy Kai," he said, "you forget that I trained young Zeke. That counts more than all the schooling of your Night Sisters put together." Timothy Kai tore her gaze away from the contrast and glared at him. She gave a derisive snort. "I think," Quirrell said, "that Timothy Kai has a point. This type of contest is not a waste, no matter what the outcome. We still lose our second-best training, someone far superior to any of the others we keep." "This is a different kind of contest," Brackus said, as if explaining to one of the students. "Those other trainees know their places, and will follow orders without second thoughts. These two, though, each thinks he is best. Only one can command. Only one can be the greatest warrior. If we allowed the loser to live, he would always resent the rule of the other, perhaps even try to undermine his authority. No, it is better we see who is the stronger." Timothy Kai agreed. "Yes, it is good for the other Jedi trainees to see one of their numbers die. Only then will they understand the depth of our convictions and realize that the Second Imperium may demand the supreme sacrifice of them as well." Brackus nodded. Quirrell made no answer. He did not wish to argue with his two superiors. Obviously, both Brackus and Timothy Kai believed in the process. Who was he to question it? And even if one of the two contestants out there were to forfeit the battle in hopes of saving his life, it would be a terrible blow to morale. Surrender is betrayal, after all. Quirrell leaned forward to watch the struggle, but he still thought it a wasteful exercise. Zeke tried to catch his breath. He couldn't hide for long, of course, not in front of so many cheering spectators who were growing more and more enthralled as the battle grew more vicious. His hands were slippery with sweat, and he knew he couldn't afford to lose his weapon at the wrong moment in this battle. He would have to be alert and aggressive. Just to be certain, he locked his lightsaber in the on position and cast about in his mind for a plan that might let him take out Villas once and for all. Then behind him, through the rock, he heard a crackling sound and instinctively threw himself away just as Villas' blazing blade sliced completely through the meteoroid, leaving each chunk of trembling rock with a flat edge that was so smooth it looked like molten mirror. If he hadn't moved that last instant, the lightsaber would have bisected beak just as it had the midroid. He turned in the air to see Villas hurtling toward him, slashing again. Zeke raised his blade to meet the other lightsaber, and the edges crossed in a shower of sparks. They pushed against each other, but found nothing for traction in weightlessness. They drifted aimlessly, blades locked, jaws clenched, and glaring defiantly into each other's eyes. When Villas's eyes were drawn for a moment to a point just behind Zeke's shoulder, Zeke barely had time to wonder what the opponent was doing before the drifting metal rod crashed into the small of his back, sending an avalanche of pain along his spine. He gasped, then released his breath in a rush. His lightsaber, still blazing, tumbled out of his hand. The crowd roared as Zeke flailed in the air, trying to move away from his opponent. With an evil grin, Villas charged toward him. Zeke could not reach his lightsaber in time. It spun like a fiery glow rod toward one of the balconies, where spectators scrambled to get out of the way. With no weapon in hand, Zeke reached beside him to grasp the still drifting metal rod. He grabbed the pole and swung it through the air with such speed it made a sighing sound. But in zero gravity, as he was on the other end of the pivot point, he began to spin like a baton. Villas slashed at the incoming metal pipe, sliced it in half a meter of it. Zeke continued to spin, and Villas swung again. The blow went wide. Zeke jabbed through the superheated end of the pipe, and the hot tip burned through Villas's armor, searing his ribs. Villas yowled in pain and grabbed the pipe himself, flinging it sideways and using the momentum to toss Zeke free. Zeke sailed across space, rebounded off one of the floating meteoroids, and reached out with his mind to call his lightsaber back to him. The weapon stopped its spiraling plunge toward the wall, reversed itself, and zipped into his grasp. When Zeke turned and looked for Villas again, he found that his opponent had vanished. The brooding young man from Dathomir was hiding, just as Zeke had. Zeke narrowed his eyes and opened his mind to the Force, listening, trying to sense Villas among the obstacles. The noise of the crowd gave him no hints, but somehow he was able to hear the faint tick, tick, tick coming from behind two cargo containers. Zeke struck out for the point. He didn't know what Villas was doing, but he wouldn't give the young man time to complete the plan. Zeke used the Force to direct himself toward the noise, but when he grabbed the edge of the cargo container and pulled himself around, his lightsaber at the ready, he found only a small chunk of rock, invisibly tapping itself against the metal wall. Villas had managed to distract him, creating a diversion with the Force, while he hid elsewhere and prepared to strike. With a sudden, powerful premonition, Zeke whirled. Villas had to be coming for him. Using his instinct, his sense with the Force, Zeke acted without thinking. Before he could consider what he was about to do, he pulled back to strike with his lightsaber, putting everything he had behind with one powerful stroke. In that instant, through the blaze of light smearing across his eyes, he saw Villas launch himself out of the cargo container, wearing a predatory grin. He had hidden an ambush, hoping to kill the unsuspecting Zeke, but Zeke had outsmarted him. Zeke's slashing blade encountered resistance as Villas flew across its path. Then, with a flash of smoke and terrible stench, the bright energy blade cleaved through flesh and bone, cauterizing as it went. Villas made a choking, gurgling sound and continued his tumbling flight through the air, but now his body was in two separate, smoking pieces. And Villas was dead, and the crowd roared. Zeke stared down at his pulsating scarlet lightsaber, too horrified of what he had done to look at the body of Villas. The spectators still cheered. This had been no simulation, he realized. This was real. Zeke knew he had taken one giant step further down the road to the dark side. He raised his head, speechless, as the voice of Brackus echoed through the zero-gravity chamber, drowning out the praise of its onlookers. "Excellent, Zeke. I knew you could do it." Timothy Kai's somewhat petulant voice came in. "My congratulations, young Lord Zeke." Then, to his absolute astonishment, overwhelming even his shock at the violence he had committed, the air in the center of the arena shimmered until an ominous image engulfed the drifting obstacles. The huge, hooded head of the Emperor himself offered his grim congratulations directly to Zeke. "You have won this battle, Zeke," the Emperor said in a voice so filled with cold power it could freeze blood. Zeke drew a quick grasp. All of the world trainees watched, absorbing the great leader's words. "You are my darkest night, Zeke. I have chosen you to personally lead my Jedi into battle against Skywalker's Jedi Academy."